The left and right side of the table, the politics of food. The left and right we're talking about is the political left and the political right, and the table we're talking about is the dinner table. Food is very political now. To motivate this, let me start off with 3 quotes. One from historian Maureen Ugel from her book, In Meat We Trust. Although we Americans eat more meat than almost anyone else in the world, our meat-centric diets are killing us, or not, depending on whose opinion is consulted. The nation's slaughterhouses churn out tainted meat and contribute to outbreaks of bacteria-related illnesses, or not. The only thing commoners might agree on is this. In the early 21st century, battles over the production and consumption of meat are nearly as ferocious as those over, say, gun control and gay marriage. The social psychologist Jonathan Haidt said, I painted it as though it's conservatives that do all the purity stuff. Liberals do it too. It's commonly joked that conservatives are always moralizing sex and telling you what you can't do, but my God, just try to order breakfast with someone who is on the far left. And I showed that quote to a liberal friend of mine, and this was his response. He said, and conservatives don't care what they put in their bodies as long as it's quick, convenient, and cheap. Yes, food is very political. You can tell whether a person leans to the political left or the political right, partly by the foods they eat. Let's talk a minute about where this term left and right of politics came from. It came from 18th century France during the French Revolution, where before they lopped the head off the king would come to the National Assembly and his supporters would sit to his right. So those were the conservatives, people who stood for tradition. His opponents, the people for the revolution, sat to his left. Those were the people opposed to tradition. Those were the radicals. So on the left were the radicals, and on the right were the people reacting to the radicals, referred to as reactionaries. So while we tend to say the left is radical and the right is reactionary, those labels don't really work very well with food. And this is why. Who really clings tighter to tradition when it comes to agriculture? Conservatives or liberals? Let's think about it like this. Conservatives are more likely to support the agricultural methods that we've used in the last 50 years. So in that way, they're holding on to tradition. They're conservatives. But liberals, who are more likely to support organic food, they're wanting to hold on to traditions that were used 500 years ago. So who's holding more on to tradition there? Who is more conservative? It's hard to say. For those reasons, the words radical and reactionary don't really work well for us, but there is an R word that does. Regulation. If you want to tell whether someone is a liberal or conservative, a Democrat or Republican, ask them whether they want more or less regulation in food. In general, if they want more, they're liberals or Democrats, and if they want less, they're conservatives or Republicans. What you eat is my business. What you eat used to be largely just your business. It was a private matter. People certainly talked about food, but mainly in regards to taste, affordability, and religion. But now what you eat affects me. It affects everybody. Food is a personal but also a social issue. The amount of soil lost to erosion depends on how a farmer farms his land. And the way a farmer farms his land depends partly on what we eat. So the practice of farm employees is of interest to everybody, including future generations. The extent to which lakes, rivers, estuaries are polluted depends on how a farmer applies fertilizer and manure. So how they farm, it affects the environment, so it affects everyone. And if you care about the feelings of farm animals, you also care about how livestock producers are treating their farm animals. Everyone, including farmers, wants food to be produced not only in an affordable way, but in an environmentally friendly way and in a humane way. The problem is we often disagree on what is humane, what is environmentally friendly, what is ethical. No wonder food has become so conservative. Food is political, and any political fight, the fights can get nasty. And this is certainly the case with agriculture and food. An example is when John Stossel on a show, Stossel on Fox Business News, called New York State Representative Felix Ortiz a cancer for wanting to tax junk food. By the way, Ortiz responded that he is a good cancer. Or when R.F. Kennedy called hog farmers a bigger threat to the U.S. than Osama bin Laden. Or when Maria Rodale wrote to President Obama saying how we are no better than Syria because the pesticides we apply to our crops are akin to chemical weapons. Food debates don't have to be this snarky and silly. And certainly we're not going to do that here. I've learned that people on the left and the right have some very valid points about agriculture and food, and you can learn a lot from listening to them. American voices. What I want to do here is highlight one key similarity between Democrats and Republicans and one key difference, and describe what that means about the politics of food. In 2012, the Gallup poll did a representative survey of Americans, and they asked them this question. They said, it was a telephone survey, just off the top of your head, would you say you have a positive or negative image of each of the following? Then they named off some institutions. One of them was free enterprise. Now there, Democrats and Republicans almost in perfect agreement. Both of them, Democrats and Republicans, close to 90% of people have a positive image of free enterprise. I think that says a lot. What that means is that we all agree that free enterprise has an important part to play in our food system. So we're not debating public versus private property. This isn't a debate about capitalism and socialism. This is a debate about what type of regulated capitalism is best. Now, where you do see differences in Republicans and Democrats is when you ask them whether they have a positive or negative image of, say, big business or federal government. When they ask them about big business, about 75% of Republicans viewed it favorably. But only about 45% of Democrats viewed big business favorably. So Republicans are very supportive of big business or corporation. Democrats aren't. Then when they asked them whether they had a negative or positive image of the federal government, everything switched sides. About 75% of Democrats had a positive view of the federal government or big government, but under 30% of Republicans did. So what this means is that Democrats, liberals are supportive of big government. They're not supportive of big business. Whereas conservatives, Republicans, they're supportive of big business, not so supportive of the federal government. So the conservatives feel about the federal government the same way Democrats feel about big business. And this says a lot about food issues, because as we're going to see, a lot of people's disagreements about food isn't so much has to do with food, it has to do with people's views towards big business or corporation. This depiction of the left and right is consistent with the research of Jonathan Haidt. Consider this quote from an interview on the Econ Talk podcast. Haidt says, but we, and when he says we, he means all Americans, both Democrats and Republicans, but we really resent a bullying alpha male. And you see this, boy, do you see this in the Tea Party, where the bullying alpha male is the government. And it harkens back to the American Revolution and liberty, liberty, liberty. You see on the left, too, where the bully is the corporation and the rich, and we need the government to protect us. To see why views on big business and big government are so important for food, let's consider the GMO debate, genetically modified organisms. Polls show that liberals and conservatives have surprisingly similar views on GMOs. And there's even some evidence to suggest that conservatives express greater disapproval of genetically modified foods than liberals. However, when it comes to regulation, that's where conservatives and liberals part ways. The liberals want to regulate GMOs more. They especially want to have mandatory labels on food indicating whether it was made with genetically modified ingredients. And conservatives don't want such regulation. We can see the relationship between political party affiliation and views on food regulation in the 2012 election in California. And in this year, California citizens could vote on whether they wanted the Republican Mitt Romney as president or the Democrat Barack Obama as president. And the county that voted for Barack Obama are in blue, and the counties that voted for Mitt Romney are in red. At the same time, they could vote for or against Prop 37. And if Prop 37 passed, it would require food manufacturers to put a label on their food if it contained ingredients from genetically modified crops or livestock. So if anything was made from, say, a transgenic crop, it would have to have a label on it telling you that. And the counties who voted for Prop 37 are in green, and the counties who voted against it, the counties who did not want to require the labeling, are in orange here. And what's interesting is that 93% of counties that voted for Mitt Romney as president, the Republican, voted against Prop 37. So you're pretty much guaranteed that if a county is largely Republican, they are also going to be opposed to the mandated labeling of genetically modified foods. We can also learn something from the 2008 election in California. And here voters could vote for or against Proposition 8, and if Proposition 8 passed, it would ban gay marriage. We have the blue counties here who were for Prop 8, the orange counties here who were against Prop 8. At the same time, they could vote on Prop 2, and if Prop 2 passed, it would ban the confinement of livestock like chicken and hogs in very small cages. So it was an animal welfare regulation. The counties who voted against it are in green, and the counties who voted for it are in red. And what's interesting there is that 100% of the counties that voted against Prop 2 voted for Prop 8. So if a county was against some animal welfare regulations like banning cramped confinement of animals, they are almost certainly for banning gay marriage. And this is not a coincidence. It's because Republicans are more likely to be in favor of banning gay marriage. Republicans are more likely to be against animal welfare regulations. This is a bit an aside, but I think it's just an interesting fact. Another example of how the political landscape matches the culinary landscape. If you're driving through an area and you start to see lots of Cracker Barrels around you, studies have shown that you're in Republican territory. Conversely, if you're going through an area and there's lots of Whole Foods, you're in Democrat land. As the reader probably guesses, liberals prefer more government regulation when it comes to food safety, health, and animal welfare. Consumers of organic foods also are more likely to be liberal. This suggests that food activists, when I say food activists, I mean those who are most vocal about having changes in agriculture, and those who are probably, food activists are more likely to be liberal. This is where a lot of our food controversies come from. Most food activists are liberal. Liberals oppose corporations. And so, therefore, the food activists are going to be more likely to support regulation of corporation, regulation in general. Given that liberals view corporations less favorably, this explains why so many agricultural controversies seem more about corporations than it does agriculture itself. Food controversies seem sometimes have more to do with who is selling the food than how the food is made. This is certainly evident in the GMO controversy. If you've ever been to Google and done a Google search, you know that after you type in your first word, Google will then make some suggestions on other words to include with that term in a complete search. They make their recommendations based on terms that other people used in a Google search. Well, in December of 2013, a friend recommended I try this. I went to Google and I typed in the word Monsanto. Monsanto is the big corporation when it comes to GMOs. I typed the word Monsanto, and then I paused to see what suggestions Google would make. About the third or fourth option was evil. It made that suggestion because so many other people in the past had used a Google search term that contained both Monsanto and evil. That's evident of how many people think that Monsanto is evil. And if they believe it is evil, then they're certainly not going to want to consume food made from genetically modified organisms whose patents are owned by Monsanto. Given this, it's not surprising that in 2011, Natural News did a survey in which they voted Monsanto the, quote, most evil corporation of the year, unquote. At the heart of the GMO movement is a belief in a conspiracy theory. Now let me be clear, I'm not saying conspiracy theory in a bad way. I don't say conspiracy theory and that is outlandish. But that the story GMO opponents are telling has to do with political and corporate corruption. On the show Stossel, they had a little debate between a supporter and opponent of GMOs. The supporter was, full disclaimer, one of my best friends. He's right down the hall from me right now, Jason Lusk, an agricultural economist. The opponent of GMOs was Jeffrey Smith from the Institute for Responsible Technology. And I learned a lot just by watching what they said in that brief interview. First, note that Lusk, the support of GMOs, is going to be telling what he would say is a science story. And he said this, he said, you look at every major scientific authority on the subject, whether it's the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, the American Medical Association, European Commission, World Health Organization, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. These are all independent bodies of independent scientists, and every one of those organizations has confirmed the basic safety of biotech food. So Lusk is saying the science says GMOs are safe. Well, what does the opponent, Smith, said? Smith is going to tell a story where it says the only way science has said it's safe is because regulatory agencies and scientific organizations has been corrupted by corporations like Monsanto. And here's one thing he said. He said this prior to the quote I said of Lusk. He said, this is Jeffrey Smith, opponent of GMOs. Well, the FDA scientists, Food and Drug Administration, were absolutely clear in the memo made public from a lawsuit. They said that the process of genetic engineering is different and leads to new and different tasks, different risks, like new allergens, toxins, and new diseases. They repeatedly urged their superiors to require more study, but the person in charge of policy at the FDA was Michael Taylor, Monsanto's former attorney, later Monsanto's vice president, now back at the FDA as the U.S. Food Safety Czar. So what he's doing is describing a revolving door system of the person who is regulating corporations was in the past and then in the future an employee of that corporation. The host of the show, Stossel, then remarked that that seems a little too much to believe that the entire FDA and scientific organizations were captured by the corporation. And Smith followed with this. He said, Monsanto has not only captured the FDA, but as I've traveled to 36 countries, they've done the same thing to many, many countries. So the point of that is to give you an idea of what this GMO debate is really about. It's not so much about the technology as it is one side saying the science says that it's safe, and another side saying that, no, the only reason people say it's safe is because corporations have corrupted the political and scientific organization. And so the main argument against GMOs has to do with negative views of corporation and the corporate conspiracy argument. For a little more facts for this, if you go to the Food Democracy Now! Website, which is an organization set up to oppose GMOs, and you go to the About Us section, they say that they are motivated by the fact that the U.S. government cares more about corporate agribusiness than farm families and consumers. The Cornucopia Institute has referenced a diagram, and it was titled, Is the USDA a wholly owned subsidiary of Monsanto?, in which they listed 15 individuals who held important positions at both the USDA and Monsanto. One of them was Hillary Clinton, by the way. So to understand the GMO controversy, you have to understand the aversion, fear, skepticism many people have, especially food activists have, of corporations. But this isn't just within GMOs. That corporate conspiracy argument is taken to almost all of agriculture. There's a very popular YouTube video by Ann LePay and Food Mythbusters where they describe how all of modern agriculture, its reliance on fertilizers and pesticides in the GM seeds, all produced by corporations. They say it's the result of a quick addiction by farmers to corporate inputs, and that they insinuate the farmers would like to quit using those corporate inputs, but they no longer can because of corporate power. So the left and right don't just happen to have different agreements on the proper role of genetically modified organisms in food. It reflects core differences in the beliefs and values of liberals and conservatives, especially their feelings towards corporations. This means that ag and food controversy is just not just about farming. It's not just about ranching or food processing. It involves economics and politics. Finally, I want to note a way in which Michael Pollan, a very popular and successful food author, has recently remarked about corporations. To promote his new book, Cooked, in 2013, he went on the Colbert Report and then proceeded to argue that the most important thing about having healthy food is making sure it's not cooked by a corporation. And then proceeded to suggest that a lot of our health problems like obesity and diabetes, it really stems from the fact that we're eating food that were cooked by corporations. Because it says corporations are more likely to use ingredients like sugar, salt, and fat than you would if you were cooking at home.
And this is a quote from this interview. He says, "The most important thing about your diet is not a nutrient but an activity, cooking. So the question about your dieting is not what you are eating, but who is it cooking. As long as a human being is cooking for you and not a corporation, you're fine."
So Pollan seems to say corporations bad, but I think if you actually talk to him, the corporation he's talking about probably isn't just the actual legal entity called a corporation, a business that's publicly owned by shareholders. I think what he's really talking about is mindless eating and letting food companies profit and supply our mindless eating. I say that because of this. I'd be willing to bet Michael Pollan approves of Whole Foods, shops at Whole Foods when he can. A lot of Whole Foods have a restaurant in there. I would imagine Michael Pollan would have nothing against you eating food at a Whole Foods restaurant, but Whole Foods is a corporation. There's been studies that show that frozen foods like Weight Watchers Smart Ones and Lean Cuisines, they help a lot of people maintain a healthy weight. Michael Pollan probably agrees that those meals are probably good for some people, but they're pre-cooked meals cooked by corporations. So because of that, I think in a lot of ways he's just using the term corporation to stand for mindless eating, and maybe a lot of other people are. And if that's the case, then there's more agreement than it may at first seem, because most everybody agrees we should eat less processed food. And everybody agrees that we should think more about what we eat, take an active role in learning the relationship between food and health, and that we are at least partially responsible for good health by choosing what foods we eat. Some parting thoughts. I know politics makes a lot of people uncomfortable. It makes me a little uncomfortable. I'm not one who normally really likes talking about political issues. But I don't think that should let us discourage from talking about the political side of food. So food is political. Good. That means if you live in a democracy, you have some control over how food is produced. Now, I know if you're one in, say, 300 million voters, you feel powerless. Well, that's the point of a democracy. One person is not supposed to have a lot of power in a democracy. So food is political. That means people will disagree at times. They will argue. Fine. Let the food debates continue wherever they lead. I say it's better than no debate at all.